Good evening, everyone. Presentation this evening is going to be focused on the first stages where I'm on my doctoral journey, and I'm looking at investigating how can we build more capacity within the system which trains trainee teachers in England in order to make sure we can sustain that pathway into the profession for future teachers. So one of the things which we're looking to do is in order to develop this additional capacity is investigating how we can use CPLD, continuing professional learning and development programs to retain placement mentors within our schools, because without those placement mentors we cannot train teachers, because in England our trainee teachers spend so much time in school, and under the new requirements from September it's going to be at least 24 weeks in school during a postgraduate course. So our organisational context, we are a school-centred initial teacher training provider. We were established back in 1993, and we normally train 50 to 60 primary and secondary teachers each year. Since we started, we've trained over 2,500 teachers. Primarily, we recruit and train people from sort of Southeast London, North Kent areas, but mainly focusing around sort of Bromley, Lewisham, Greenwich, Bexley, that sort of area. So, policy context, I was putting this presentation together, and then on the 17th of May last week, the Education Select Committee published their latest report on teacher recruitment, training and retention, and I've lifted two particular paragraphs from there as well, in terms of every year, really since the last decade, we have, apart from the pandemic year, we have missed the teacher training targets for the number of teachers which come into the profession each year. And in particular for the current cohort going through, we've only actually recruited about 48% of all of the teachers which we need in training to meet the workforce needs. There is variation by subjects, but the link here to placements is buried down in section 123 by one of my colleagues who's head of initial teacher education at UCL. There is an increasing issue around availability of placements for student and trainee teachers. We've got a situation where we've got high teacher workload. We've then got the teachers who are then volunteering to become teacher trainer mentors on top of that, and schools are retreating back from offering placements. And so if we've got less placements, we can train less teachers, and if we're training less teachers, our recruitment and retention crisis is going to get worse, because the teachers who are left in schools doing the placements, they will become more and more overwhelmed. So we have an established issue, and it is getting worse. So within England, there are requirements in terms of the initial teacher training criteria, and those are that trainees should have at least 2 placements, and there should be sufficient time in school so that they can reach the minimum requirements for what's required qualified teacher status, which is the stage of professional formation in England. The practice elements, the placements, are used as part of the core development of their confidence and competence to be demonstrably good teachers, in order to translate from being a trainee teacher into what's called an early career teacher within England. So our ITT criteria get published every year, and currently for postgraduates school placements, trainees have to spend 24 weeks, 120 days in schools, and they also have to spend 15 hours as a minimum in the classroom observing, teaching and co-teaching within those general school placements. Now, when they're observing, teaching and co-teaching, that relies upon the expertise of an operative and experienced teacher who is either a mentor or a supervising teacher, to help to model, deconstruct practice going through. Obviously, if we don't have the placement mentors in school which are prepared, and schools have capacity to take on these long placements, then we are again having another constraining factor on the supply of new teachers. So some of the work which I'm doing at the moment is looking at how can we use the ideas of communities of practice which we can draw around the group of trainees which are within a school. And I'm working on definitions of two particular ideas which I've been working on for a number of years. And this is the idea about providing that coherent supportive environment called a team around the trainee. Now, the novice or trainee teacher which we are developing, that supportive team around the trainee needs to be situated within a community of practice with those shared values and ethos. And if they do, then they become a professional learning community which has got that capacity to instigate agentic change in the practice of trainee teachers. You cannot train a trainee teacher with just exposing them to one placement mentor within school. There needs to be an ecosystem around that trainee. So it could be input from the behavioural lead, the SENCO, teaching and learning leads, working with technicians, working with LSAs, ISAs. There is a community of practice which gels around that trainee, which helps to develop their professional practice. Now, within our particular organisation, we have a distributed leadership structure. So we have individual professional learning communities within each of our schools, and those professional learning communities, they are led by a local leader, so an operative person, which we would call a senior mentor, but under the new ITT criteria, they're called lead mentors. And looking at the conclusions from Carney, Pedder and Opfer, accordingly, Hargreaves and Connor, etc., those shared values and objectives which are instigated within each individual professional learning community, those are helping to provide the bedrock of that professional ethos which is needed to train teachers. And the cross-institution links between those individual professional learning communities within each school is really important. So my role within that distributed leadership function is to empower my senior mentors, have the autonomy and the authority to manage their individual teams within their schools, and for them to culture and develop that team around the trainee. So they're managing their own professional learning community, which, if you go back to some of the original research, professional learning communities were conceived to support the teaching and learning of pupils. I'm envisaging that these PLCs are around the teaching and learning of adults. So we are developing teachers off of these. So here's an example of a graphic which I've used in some of the pieces I've written for International Professional Development Association. So we have a professional learning network within our SCITT. So if you imagine these are 3 of our schools. Inside the dotted box, you have got the professional learning community, which is within that school, which is situated spatially and temporally within the development of teachers through their training phase. So senior mentors are local leaders, you might have subject leaders, mentors and supervising teachers. Now, our head teachers from our partnership schools, they form what's called our consortium management board. They're our board of directors. They're a bit like our governors. But on an operational basis, they coordinate with each other, and that's the black dotted lines. Our senior mentors meet regularly every half term. So we have that distributed leadership function, but they also have peers which they can come back to, they can talk to. We can look at scenario-based learning, dilemma-based coaching. Those cross-institution links are also then seen between our subject leaders, which are across our schools. So we'll have ones, for example, look after all our history trainees, and they will bring all of the history trainees together to do subject-specific training. Our mentors form communities of practice, but also they come together on a variety of different occasions during the course of the year. Supervisors and teachers at the moment are not part of that broader cross-institution network, but that is something which I'd be very interested in developing in the future. So for September 24, we have specific ITT criteria coming, which is laying down the minimum entitlements for trainee teachers. Up until now, the models of the training and support and mentoring expectations was very much down to the individual ITT or ITE training provider. So they've laid down, the DFE this is, that each trainee teacher must have 1.5 hours of mentoring each week on general school placements. But when you look at what the mentors are supposed to do, they have to have expertise in evidence-based subject approaches to teaching. Now that's evidence-based, not research-informed. So there is perhaps a tension there. The mentor's role is to provide effectively part of that education and training around the curriculum content provided by the ITT provider, which is again another paradigm shift in terms of the role of the mentor. And their role as mentors is very much about guiding supported trainees through that curriculum. There isn't a responsibility for the ITT providers to develop the mentoring skills, knowledge, and capacity of the individual mentors. It's very much about making sure they can deliver curriculum content. So this capacity issue which we've got within schools, this came out from some analysis which NFER did for the million+ group of schools in the UK. And even before we look at how do we build capacity, we've also got to recognise that there is geographic and also school size differences in placement capacity, whether schools are local authority maintained schools or they're part of multi-academy trusts. There's impacts of the level of deprivation in the local communities and whether they feel that they can offer more placements, etc. So it's at a national level, it's a very complicated position as what the drivers and limitations are to placement capacity. So even within the Department for Education's own sort of risk analysis, which they did about how do we manage school placement, they identified the impacts which their own policies will have on the mandatory participation in training, not only for the ITT mentors, but also what's called the early career framework, which is it's a CPD framework, which is the first 2 years of the teachers' careers. So the DFE themselves recognise that there is a problem mentor availability within schools because of going from a 1-year statutory induction to a 2-year statutory induction. There is also variations in terms of how many schools are participating in ITT, and also whether that school capacity can be grown with unknown partners within our schools, within our school system. So we've got constraining issues to do with ITT policy, we've got constraining issues to do with capacity within schools, and then we have questions around the way in which this training is going to be delivered into schools. Training in its traditional sense within schools is very much seen as time which is taken and it is done to staff. It is on top of their normal role as a teacher. It's synchronous, so everybody will do it at the same time. Everyone troops down to the hall or to the CPD room and does it all at the same time. Registers are taken and it's checked up on and it's audited, etc. So it's very much being seen as done to staff. The way which we're working on is a continuing professional learning and development model, which is enabling the mentors to have ownership of that developmental journey. And one aspect we're looking at is accreditation for prior learning and accreditation for experiential learning. So if somebody's been an NQT or an ECT mentor, or they've mentored middle leaders, for example, we ask them then to become an ITT mentor. Are we going to expect them to start from scratch and everyone doing the same training at the same time when they've got evidence of impact already of their mentoring? We're developing an asynchronous model so that placement mentors can fit in the training around other commitments. So then there's going to be hopefully more engagement with that because they can choose when they're going to do it. It needs to be invested in by the employer, and it needs to be central to the development of those members of staff. So I've got some further suggestions on the upcoming slides as well. We're going from a learn that and learn how to's type statement in terms of what an operative mentor must understand, and to a knowing. So what that the mentor, if they're confident and competent in the role, things that they should know that and know how to statements. And that is where they got demonstrable impact on themselves and also on others. So we've got tensions within the system as well. If we go back to some of the work of Plazer et al. In 2018, who built on the work of Hobson and Malderes in 2013, at that stage it was recognized that mentoring within schools has no formal delineated career progressions. Therefore, it's things which you are volunteered for rather than making a conscious choice to undertake. There's much higher expectations of training. All placement mentors must have 20 hours of training in their first year from 2024-2025. It doesn't matter if they've been a successful ITT mentor for the previous 20 years. Everyone needs to start at the same point according to the ITT criteria. But there is passing mentions of that you can have accreditation for prior learning if it's on a commensurate program, but very little guidance from the DFE about that. Those new requirements on mentors could be perceived as an obligation and therefore a burden, and therefore we're already within the system seeing a number of people which are individual mentors and schools and teams which are saying we cannot support this. So we've potentially got a growing problem ready for September when training providers are looking for placements. So we need to build capacity within the system. So I looked at it as a response to the points put forward by Plazer. We have placement mentors as an established role with a specific status. People have to apply for it. People are then considered. We then look to develop them in that role. We want to ensure that mentors and their employers understand that if you are an operative and experienced and effective mentor, you have a real tangible impact on the professional practice of another, whether a trainee, a new member of staff, or somebody else within the school ecosystem. We need to also recognize that the time which mentors take to develop themselves should be offset against the global CPLD requirements which are placed on staff within an individual school or trust. We need to also move from performative benchmark driven targets and training, like you must do 20 hours, to actually have that professional learning communities within our schools and have professional learning conversations between members of those communities to look at the way in which they can discuss and work out and develop their professional schema around effective mentoring. What does it mean? And give an opportunity for all people to discuss what does mentoring mean. And one of the ideas I'm working on is that it's an individual trainee mentor level, but also at the school level, we develop local communities of mentoring practice. And these give an opportunity for mentors and aspiring mentors to discuss effective ITT mentoring. So it is seen as something which is owned by the individual school, and the development is seen as supporting the ITT provider as well. So these communities of mentoring practice, and so they are situated within individual schools, but the schools which work together, they have shared ethos, culture, and approaches to the way in which teacher training is understood and actually supported. It needs to be contextual, and it needs to be situated practice development. So whether it's a primary school, a nursery, whether it's an all through secondary school, whether it's middle schools, whatever it is, we need to ensure that it's situated within that local practice development. If it's an SEND setting or an AP setting as well, we need to be sensitive that the mentoring within those processes may have different priorities than if they were in a mainstream secondary school, for example. That community mentoring practice within an individual school, you may have 2, 3, 4, 10 trainee teachers in there with their associated mentors. They would become a professional learning community. And those networks with those shared values and approaches, they then become a professional learning network, which is centered on initial teacher training. So there's some references as well. If people are interested, I've written a few things for IPDA, which is in their blog section as well. And some of these ideas, which I'm working on here, are moving into the literature review for the doctorate as well. A little bit of about myself. I did a MA in Leadership and Education with Lizana at University of East London, and she's now one of my doctoral supervisors. I would highly recommend getting in contact with Collective Ed and the Chartered College of Teaching, and also I'm going to do a little plug for IPDA as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Derek, and also just really insightful to see how the changes in, the ITT curriculum and the legislation is impacting on, the mentoring support and how it can happen. And I think I saw someone who was about to ask a question. So it'd be really lovely to hear from colleagues. If anyone has a question for Derek, you've just shared the UK Parliament's documentation, the House of Commons documentation regarding the Education Committee report that they've published in regards to teacher retention and also recruitment. And I thought, the points that you obviously highlighted were quite relevant, but I think it's a report that we need to read quite forensically and in a lot of detail, because it says an awful lot about what's currently happening in the landscape, but also how we then need to consider teacher development around that issue of teacher retention and recruitment. Because again, I've read an article not so long ago where it emphasizes that if we lose so many teachers, we also lose that depth of knowledge. So the quality of the mentoring would be different. So is there something that we need to also think about in terms of developing mentors' ability to mentor regarding subject specific knowledge and how deep they need to be able to go with that?
Yeah, and I think this in particular, the under recruitment against targets. I think we've hit the targets once in 10 years or something like that. So we've got a diminishing pool of expert teachers within our schools. There seems to be a tension between recognition of practitioner expertise in the classroom and in the school, and against the delivery of a curriculum model. And I've got concerns it may injure the pride, I think, is one way of looking at it. If you've got people who've been supporting trainee teachers to gain QTS through the deconstruction of practice, we could be in a situation where we are de-skilling mentors and they are delivering curriculum. Now you've also got tension that if you've got somebody, for example, who has a trainee on placement from University A or placement 1, say up to Christmas, and they're dutifully doing all their mental training and their understanding of the mental curriculum and the ITT curriculum of that university. They then have somebody from University B for a second placement from, say, January through to July. That university has a different curriculum, a different expectation on mentors. They have a different model of delivery of that knowledge, and different expectations in terms of deliberate practice. You could see mentors will go, well, I like working with University A, so I'm not going to take trainees from University B. And so you then have a whole scale loss of capacity within the system. And if you are dictating to experienced mentors what should be taught and not in context of where the trainee is with their practice at that point, I've got real concerns you are going to de-skill mentors as well, because it'll be similar to you are delivering a training package, not you are reflexively and reflectively developing the practice of these novice teachers.
Really interesting, isn't it? We have a comment here in the chat as well by Zahu. It's saying, is the policy emphasis causing that, well, causing a limited focus or less focus on mentoring and initial teacher training, or is it the status of the mentors or shifting in priorities? He's just asking to gain an understanding regarding his lens, obviously from a global perspective.
I think there is definitely a shift, and it's at the moment we would expect our trainee our placement mentors to provide the contextual deconstruction of practice, and that's what they're used to. They're used to modeling and deconstructing practice. We're now shifting the role of the mentor over to the delivery of curriculum, and them having to have a very broad understanding of lots of different aspects of the curriculum from that particular provider as well. And I've got real concerns that you're going to have mentors who'll just go, I've not signed up for this, and so they will pull out from it as well. So I don't know, I can't unpick why there's been this shift from a traditional model, and where they're expecting mentors to be able to understand the complexities of andragogic principles in terms of how do you teach adults, as opposed to what they've been doing at the moment is training adults. So there are differences there.
It's a real emphasis shift, isn't there? I can see Anika. Hello, Anika. I'm so sorry my camera was not working. Nice to see you.
No, it's okay.
Anika's a colleague from UBL, and great to see you here. I'm going to hand over to you.
Hey, yeah, I just had a quick question. Derek, what is your experience on mentors before they were given this additional responsibility? Because I've been working in teacher education since 2008, I think it is, and where you normally had people eager to take on this role of mentorship, as the years have gone on, because of added workload and pressures and everything else, they've been more and more resistant to taking on the mentoring role, taking on less paid placements, less students into schools. And now with this additional component added onto it, often we found that mentors, where there was good mentoring, it's because the mentors were eager to do this role. And where there were challenges in mentoring, or the mentor-trainee relationship was kind of there was like difficulties between the relationship, is often because those mentors were told they have to be mentoring, just as as you're directed in other areas of the work, and how much of that then kind of continues now, because this is just an added workload to already, which is quite a heavy role as a mentor.
And it's thanks for that. I've been running the collegiate now for 11 years, but I've been involved in from being a mentor for about 20 odd years. Pretty much most of my professional career I've mentored in some way. As a provider, what we've done is we've looked at all of our systems and processes every year. And we've looked at the workload for the trainees, the workload for the mentors, the workload for the senior mentors, like the coordinator mentors in the school. And we've really cut back on the paperwork side, even though it's electronic now. But we've rationalized, we've looked every year, we look at every single system, process, bit of paper and the rest of it. Does this make them better teacher? Does this give time and space for the mentor to be able to deconstruct and discuss professional practice? And so what we've done, we've steadily clawed back from what we do. And what we found is where we're communicating the rationale for changing systems to simplify things, we get mentors which are very loyal. I've got mentors which have organized for, which have mentored for our organization for like 20 plus years. We've been running 30 years. And they are then happy to deliver training. It's seen as part of our, because our partnership is quite static. We've got 9 secondary schools in Bromley. We've got a couple up in Greenwich, but there is that very much that family feel. You've got all the science mentors know each other, the geography mentors know each other, because they come together, and you've got this cross-linking with this professional learning network. When I talk to my opposite numbers, other training providers, they're going, but how do you build that? And I said, well, you look after your mentors. You don't ask them to do pointless things. We've had a shift in terms of the paperwork, which is required on a weekly and monthly basis, that it's the trainee which records it. So we don't actually ask our mentors on a weekly basis to record anything, apart from having the coaching conversations as a result of like coaching observations. And it's because I've said to my mentors, I want you to spend more time discussing practice than filling out paperwork. But changing of paperwork within organizations, particularly large universities, it's very political. We've already done this, and this quality assurance and quality control, and that's where sometimes smaller organizations can be more nimble. And because we've got smaller teams across my organization, between my mentors, my senior mentors, and everyone else is involved in the program, I'm looking at probably 75 people. But I think about a university, you've got 4, 5, 6 times that number of people you are trying to pull together a network. But one of the things I've said to, because I've done some consultancy work for a couple of universities, and one of the things I've said to them is, what is the USP if you've got a really busy mentor who've got the choice of being a mentor for University A, University B? What is the USP? What are you actually going to say that this mentoring process, how is it going to improve the life of the mentor who's giving up their own time to do this? And that's a real mind shift in universities, and perhaps looking at breaking this big lump of mentors that you've got and big lump of placement schools into territories. And so you build up that network between key members of staff, let's say in a university, and a small group of, say, 20 schools, and have that ownership of it. And that's the only way I can see that you can build up a group identity, because that's quite a powerful motivating approach. And particularly, we use a lot of things like scenario-based learning, dilemma-based coaching. That's the collective ed side of it. And we do a lot of that to give the opportunity for mentors to discuss what-if scenarios.
And then with this second part where you've said that they'll now be responsible for teaching trainees as well, then I've kind of been part of mentor training where it's mainly about going through the paperwork and responsibilities of a mentor, responsibilities of a trainee. Is the onus now on HE providers to say, we need to actually be teaching the mentors on how to teach trainees, and is this additional CPD that is provided as part of the package of, well, if you are going to mentor for us, then this is additional training or certification that we provide you?
And I think we're in terms of, if you are going from what you see a traditional mentoring relationship where you're developing practice in context, and you're going over to you are having to teach the mentors the theory which you are teaching to the trainees in order for them. Mentors are going to go, I've read this, but what does it mean? And then you could be very clever as a mentor and say, well, can you talk me through this as the to get the trainee to talk you through it? But I feel that's putting a lot of mentors on the back foot, and this is why they're going, I've got to do what? But I'm a busy physics mentor. I haven't got time to teach about, I don't know, cognitive load theory. That's their job. That's a real conundrum for universities. So I'm writing a CPLD framework, and so one of the modules which mentors can elect to do if they haven't got the demonstrable expertise is around the difference between evidence-informed practice and research-informed practice, and where does the Chartered College of Teaching sit? Where does Collective Ed, all these other organisations, where the EEF sit, and get them to be fluent in the language. And I think that's something which we've got to be really careful about, because mentors are expecting to do like an hour mentor meeting. They don't want to have to do 3 hours of reading in order to do that, because mentors just going to go, back to you, not doing it. So
interesting debate.
It is
happy to pick up these conversations afterwards, more than happy to.
It's also semantics, isn't it? It's the language that's being used. Evidence informed is not the same as research informed, and I think that's an interesting one. We see that also with the MPQs, that there's a lot of reading to do on the MPQs, whereas in the past it was far less so. And in itself, that people enjoy engaging with it, but it also causes an impact in terms of, the amount of work they can do and the workload it generates. Even though it's designed to just take 2 hours a week, it takes longer. So there's tensions on all ends. And I think what's also interesting, Derek, is we kind of look at the ICT market review and changes often organizations do in isolation, but we also need to remember that the early careers framework has mentor training, as well as then there's a requirement for the MPQs, not all the MPQs, but most of them, also has a requirement for coaching, and often those very same people are the coaches and mentors for all those different courses for all the colleagues in those schools. And that too is tricky. And how do you acknowledge and recognize the development that's been done for that, then feeding into the ITT requirements or whatever else is required? It's a complex landscape, and I think it's important that we think about it.
Yeah, and that's part of when we had our mentor training requirements signed off by our ITT associate. A lot of it we put into our framework as around accreditation for prior and experiential learning, because I know we've got a number of people within our family of mentors who go ITT mentor, they're then an ECT or an NQT or ECT mentor for 2 years, then they want to come back to ITT. So how do you keep them current, but also recognise all the expertise they've got? And this is why we've gone back and looked at and used the 2015, 2016 national mentoring standards as the basis for the framework.
And those are interesting, aren't they? Because they're not enforceable, but they are really helpful in terms of the guidance they provide. If there are no other questions, I just want to thank everyone for the contributions. Derek, thanks for your very insightful contribution. I know you're at the beginning of your journey as a PhD student, but you've made so much progress already. And it's really nice to do your research, and you're sort of focusing on your day job as well, I can imagine.